they think they're going to get less love, but actually it's that letting go when you realize it was there all along. We're always outsourcing our energy to something else, then it's difficult for us to accept who we are. And because it is difficult, it's easier to go to something else.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of Next Level University, where we show you how to level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. Today, we have a very special guest. We booked her a couple of weeks ago. We jeffed things. Things went wrong, but she is back. She is a self-love mentor, a manifesting queen, a speaker, and a coach, the one and only Gina Swire. How are you doing?
I am wonderful, thank you. A lot better than last time, which the universe did not want us to speak last time.
Well, maybe we have learned lessons since then, and this will be a far more impactful episode.
Oh yeah, 100 lifetimes have passed since then.
So people see you now. You do retreats. You do all sorts of self-love things. But I always think it's important to go back to who was Gina back in the day before she took out on this journey and became the amazing young lady that she is today. So can you tell us a little bit about who you used to be and tell us your story a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. You do self-love things. Yeah, I do that. Okay, so back in the day, I was a little bit unconfident at school. It turned into some social anxiety. It turned into me almost becoming a mute, believe it or not. So at school, I just got more and more quiet, had this really mean girl, negative self-talk, which I didn't have any idea what that was. And it got out of control to the point where I just believed I wasn't very intelligent, I wasn't very good, I was just a number, and nothing was going to amount to much in my life. And so that was lame. And then going from school I went to a different college. And so my school was very strict. It was very like academic, which I know a lot of schools are. It was very straight-laced. It was very uniform. And my cosmic soul did not really enjoy that, even at that point. So went to a different college. And when I got there, it was a bit more open-minded. And I was like, started to come into my own a little bit, started to speak a little bit. But mostly it was alcohol fueled. So I know a lot of like late teenagers are just like plowing the booze. And that's what I did. I just came out of my shell, but in this unhealthy way. And so going from there, I then started getting scouted for modeling. And modeling was a super scary thing that I didn't really want to do. But everyone around me was telling me that I should do it. My dad was saying, make hay while the sun shines. Hey, if you go and do modeling, have a few years off, don't go to uni, and then you can pay for yourself to go in a couple of years. So I was like, okay, well, we'll see. So went to this modeling agency who then told me, even though they'd invited me in, that I was too heavy. I was too fat. I needed to go away, lose like 10, 15 pounds in 2 weeks, come back, and then they would sign me up. So I was this distraught kind of, I think, 18-year-old at that time. And I just remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. Because at that time, it was all about being skinny. Like, that was my goal. That was my whole life purpose, just to be skinny. And I wasn't doing very well at it. I was failing repeatedly. And yeah, so it wasn't very good. Anyway, so the universe wanted me to become a model, which I feel I had no say in. So every available option was coming at me for modeling. So when that door closed, another door opened and someone else asked me for modeling. But this time they wanted me to be bigger. They wanted me to be curvy because it was for wedding dresses. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And so 6 months later, the same modeling agency got back in touch because they heard I'd been modeling and they didn't really like that because they wanted a cut of it. and they invited me back in to be the Manchester, where I'm from in England, the first ever plus size model. So now there's a lot of plus size models around the world, and most brands have one or two, or, you know, it's a thing. But then I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, this is literally the end of my life. Street cred is done. I am like, if I become basically what I thought was a fat model, I am over. And so I hid it for quite a while. I became a plus size model and hid it. So I was doing all these modeling jobs, but it was for kind of like boring old lady plus size things. And then I'd be like, yeah, I've got a modeling job. And my friends think I'm going to be like shooting some cool bikinis in a cool country in Vogue or whatever. And it wasn't the reality. So yeah, lots of things were building up. And I was getting these beliefs, these self-beliefs were getting more and more strong, that I'm not enough, I'm not cool, I'm not intelligent. And it was just getting crazy. Yeah. So as that just built up and built up through all my 20s, I became more and more successful with modeling, got signed in all different countries, and started to do some more cooler jobs, and got ASOS, which is a huge brand in England, and Macy's in America, and all these bigger name brands, and did really, really well. And as my career got bigger, so did I. I was getting bigger. Yeah, so all these things were being kind of pushed and tested within me. This girl that wanted to be skinny, and then I was being pushed into this like plus size role. And so it caused a lot of chaos and a lot of hating my body and not accepting myself. And it was like these two separate parallel realities. Yeah. So a lot was going on back then, for sure. It wasn't always this way.
One of the things that you said, I think maybe it's either on your website or maybe it was on a post, but you said that you dealt with, I think you phrased it as, I dealt with a strange or a tough relationship with myself, as a lot of women do. Why do you think, and we talked about this a little bit in the other episode that didn't see the light of day, but why do you think that's such a thing for women in terms of the self-love, in terms of perfectionism and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a lot of things. So obviously what we're surrounded by. So I grew up reading all the magazines and I would believe everything it said. My mum was on Weight Watchers every week. So, you know, every Monday she would go and get weighed, and then she'd come back with all these colourful recipes. And so I was around that. And I do think mum generation people were really, really like pushed into that weight loss thing, because it was kind of the first generation where they were getting a bit bigger and women were a bit more empowered, and all these different things were changing the dynamic, and they didn't really have the tools to deal with it. But now we are going into like another reality where women are even more empowered and want more for themselves. And yeah, so it's this strange time in the lineage of women, I think, where we're not quite there yet, but we're not there anymore. So it's this kind of gray area. And then, of course, with social media and filters, and yeah, there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah. So this is an amazing thing that we're interviewing you, because self-love, again, 2 weeks ago we did how to improve your relationship with yourself. And there was one thing that I said on that mastermind, which was, it's interesting because growing up, and just so you know, and I think we've told you this before, so Kevin was raised by two women, his mom and his grandmother. His father left when he was very young. I was raised by my older sister, 3 years older, and my mom. And my father passed away when I was 2. So we were both raised by women, and that's become such a massive advantage in hindsight, even though it was challenging for a time. But one thing that I noticed growing up is, like, I would hear things, right? So I don't like my hair, it's too thin. Then you would hear people who have thick hair say, I don't like my hair, it's too thick. And I noticed this in hindsight. I've had a lot of memories coming back. It's like, why are we all wishing we were different than we are? Because isn't that the opposite of self-love? What is your take on that? And what do you believe is the root cause of this whole, like, I should be different mentality?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I used to always wish I was a petite brunette. That's like been a long-standing thing, petite brunette. I always used to say, if I could come back in my next life, that's what I want to be. And I'm a tall, curvy blonde. So it's the opposite. Yeah. And why do we do it? I think it's just another way to deflect from who we are. Like if we're always outsourcing our energy to something else, then it's difficult for us to accept who we are. And because it is difficult, it's easier to go to something else.
Powerful answer. So I researched you earlier. I read your story. You said that after 12 years of a poor relationship with yourself in the modeling industry and all that stuff, you came across a nutrition program that was actually not what you expected. It was 1/3 personal development, 1/3 business. What do I have time for that for? As I think you wrote in your bio. And then 1/3 was nutrition, which is what you really wanted. And you said that that's what changed your life. So for me, personal development was what, like, oh my God, if I had personal development when I was younger, like it would have changed everything for me. What was that shift like for you? And then the second piece of this question too is, you don't go to the gym once and you're suddenly in shape. How do we get our listeners to realize that the next level is a process that never ends in terms of their relationship with themselves?
Yeah. So I call it following the breadcrumbs. So if I actually, if I didn't have self-love, which at that time I didn't, and I do remember berating myself. So I signed up to this course, like you say, which was for selfish reasons, for personal reasons. I felt unhealthy. I'd been partying way too much. I was living in America, which there's access to all kinds of foods that I wasn't used to. I was in the plus size world. I was constantly being told I wasn't big enough. And so I was getting more and more unhealthy. And I was like, right, I need to make myself feel better. So I'm going to join this course. Joined a course, and typical Gina style, didn't research it properly, didn't read the stuff, didn't look into it. I was just like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'll take you. Paid for it, and it was expensive. So I was like, yeah, it's expensive, it's going to work. That was my mentality. And when I arrived there, literally the first thing I was like, you know, that like, oh God, what have I done? That feeling like the lights just go down. And I remember just thinking, Gina, you're such an idiot. Like, why have you done this again? Why? But actually looking back, this was the biggest step on my journey. And I was guided to do that, even though I didn't really understand what that was. I saw this course, it looked attractive. I was in some way being guided. But that's where, like, someone who has self-love would berate themselves, and then someone who doesn't have self-love would berate themselves, and someone who does have self-love would be like, well, I was always doing my best, I was being guided in some way, and I trust that, you know, even if it's not perfect, it's leading me on my path. So once I went into the course and started studying it, and realized that a lot of it was business and personal development. The personal development part, I remember, just like you said, I was just like, why have we not been taught this?
Right.
Why are we not taught this at school? This is genius. It's gold. And the best thing was, it was so simple. You know, I remember one of the questions where it was talking about life purpose and life direction. And I'd always just kind of thought I wasn't very intelligent, possibly because of school, and then gone into modeling because it seemed like it was easy and it was going to work, and just like followed on. I'd never really had any major, like, this is where I'm going. I'd never had a North Star, as they call it in personal development. So even though I was driven, I was passionate, I didn't have like a vision. So when they just said, if you could do anything in your life, what would you do? I was like, oh, well, yeah, I would work with women. I would do this. I would do this about food. And I knew exactly, but I'd just never really been asked that simple question. So the process and the simplicity of it was amazing. What came out was so intricate, and I knew it all. I just hadn't been asked. I hadn't asked myself those questions. So that created such a massive shift so quickly. And not long after that question, I asked myself, did I quit everything? I literally was just like, nope, this thing I've been doing for 14 years, nope, it is done. And I remember I was stood on a set in a really fancy studio in Manhattan, massive team. And, you know, as the model, you kind of like right in the limelight of it all. It's all, everyone's doing their job, but ultimately you have to bring it. And I remember just standing there and I was almost laughing to myself whilst feeling like I was crazy. Everyone was running around and I was just thinking, I'm about to leave. I'm about to quit this life. I'm done. I'm out. Like my soul has left.
Right.
So yeah, I just left one day, and then it all clicked into place.
So beautiful.
For the listeners, Alan and I both left jobs, and I try to explain what it's like to have that weight lifted off your shoulders. So this is a two-part question that has nothing to do with anything, really. So number one, what did that feel like when you left that old life behind? And number two, we're talking a lot about self-love. What is your definition of self-love? Because I think a lot of people are afraid to be arrogant. They're afraid if they love themselves, they'll come off as cocky. So did the weight lift off your shoulders? And what is your definition of self-love?
Oh, yeah. So that night, I remember I walked out of the studio knowing full well in my soul that I was not going to be a model anymore, with no idea what I was going to do in the future. But I didn't have like a plan B. But I remember walking out of there, closing the door and just being like, see ya. And then, I remember I messaged my agent and I was fully waiting for the wrath because I'd booked a flight back to England. And I was thinking, oh my God, she's totally going to go mental, which was kind of her thing. And she didn't at all. She just was like, yeah, you take some time for yourself. It's all good. I was like, oh, okay. Dodged a bullet there, got on the plane. And I remember this actually was the first time I ever did this practice, which now, anytime I go on a plane, train, or ferry, which I've been on recently, ferries for some reason, anytime I go on like a journey, I do this process. And this first time was then, and it must have been guided, which is where I just think about what I'm leaving behind in that country and like imagine like a big pair of scissors just cutting it all off and leaving it there. And so it's just a simple little visualization, but I remember doing that for modeling, and I've probably done 10 modeling jobs since then in 5 years, and that's just for friends. So I literally quit.
When you mentioned, oh, go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So leaving that, I remember my soul self knew full well, I'm never going back. I'm done. But my human self was a bit like, oh my God, what are you doing, girl? You fool! Like, whoa, hold on, wait, where's the plan B? Where's the safety net? Hold on. And I was like, no. The soul self was just so loud, like, Shanti, we have this. So anyway, I get on the plane and I remember I got home, and the following 2 weeks after I got home, I shed 2 whole dress sizes of weight, literally in 2 weeks. It was just like, don't need that anymore, goodbye. And all this kind of like protection, like layer that was suited for that was just gone overnight. It was the craziest thing. So I literally, the weight on my shoulders and my hips and my everything just dropped off me, physically and metaphysically. It was amazing.
My goodness.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You keep mentioning being guided. And you also talked about sort of a giant pair of scissors cutting off from. We talk a lot about untethering from our past in order to grow into who we need to be. It's interesting because we have these goals, right? And then we have to align our behaviors, our values, and our beliefs with that goal if we want to achieve it. And that affects our identity. And in order to have a new identity, you have to shed an old one. I mean, we just talked about the rebrand of the Hyperconscious podcast. Now we're next level uni, as you would call it. And even if you didn't go to university, now you're here. So that's awesome. Full circle.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to ask you is, for our listeners, you mentioned being guided a couple times so far. What does that mean to you? And I believe that, if prayer is you talking to God or source or spirit, intuition is God talking to you. But I think a lot of people either don't hear their intuition because it whispers too softly, or if you're in mental, physical, or emotional pain, it's probably too noisy. So did you always feel guided? If not, why not? And how do you feel about all that now?
Yeah, I always did. So I remember being a child and hearing these voices and being like, whoa, what was that? Like, what am I supposed to know that? I know something now that, I know these things. So I remember thinking I was weird as a child. And then I did the teenage thing where I was like, this is way too weird. Reject.
Right.
I'm not gonna. And then it was when I was 24 and my father passed away. And I remember being with him when he died, and that reconnected me to it. So I remember speaking to him, and then 2 minutes later, his soul, his spirit was gone. And I was in that room, and it just reconnected me to spirit again. And I was like, yeah, I can see spirit. I saw spirit just leave. And so I remember that day going to the window a few moments after he died, just looking out the window and everything being in full HD, and just knowing I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know exactly who I need to speak to. And just knowing all this stuff that I think had been waiting for me to hear it. So, yeah, I definitely think, when I talk about guidance to people and they're like, I don't have that. And my usual response is, you do, you just can't hear it. You're not listening. You need to create space.
Right.
And so that's what I did when I quit modeling. I also went vegan at that time. I'm not anymore. Went vegan, quit alcohol, quit men. I went celibate for a year. Pretty much quit my phone, quit my job, of course. Just everything that was quittable without me dying, I quit. That was what I was guided to do. So that was the biggest spaciousness ever. And that's when I started to have all these downloads, and the first downloads about self-love, the really strong voices, when I was literally on this lounge floor begging for a sign from the universe, which, again, I'd never really done that before, but seen it in films, and I always used to think it was really dramatic. But then all of a sudden I was there, I was doing that. And while I was there, I was asking for a sign over and over and over again for a few weeks. And then I got them. Then I would hear the messages, I would hear the things. So one of the first ones that came through, which is really, really simple, but really profound for me, was, Gina, you've always thought you need to change yourself. You don't. And that was it. And I remember just being like, whoa, that's profound. That's big, because this whole time I've been trying to be bigger for work, smaller for work, taller, this, that, more intelligent, less sexy, more this, more that, whatever it is, to fit the outside world. And the message was just like, well, if you didn't need to change anything, then who would you be? And I just started to think about that. And I was like, oh yeah, that would be so easy and so fun, like so simple. And from then, that's it. Like, I don't try and fit my outside surroundings anymore, which I spent my whole life trying to do. So it was these profound things that came through in this spaciousness that changed the game.
Were you in emotional pain when you were on the floor asking for guidance? Because I think that's a common denominator that I've seen, because you're not the only female that I've met that's done that sort of purge of like, get rid of everything. My girlfriend does a purge each year where she like disconnects from all her old self. And I can see, I met her during her purge, believe it or not. And I can see that the things she was thinking about and contemplating and deciding in that purge, I'm already seeing them manifest now into reality. But what's interesting is I think we all need to do that on a more regular basis rather than wait for some crisis. Because, Kevin had his suicidal moment. I had my car accident. And we both did that sort of purge the old self in a near-death experience. But how do we do that more consistently? And then after this, I'll let you ask 2 questions because I just jumped right in. I just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. We do need to do these purges. And obviously, there's ways you can do it. A lot of the time, I live in Bali. So there's a place there called Bali Silent Retreat where you go and you stay for a week and you don't speak. Doing something like that where you literally create that space and get rid of what you don't need is one way. And then ayahuasca and plant medicine and this kind of thing, the literal physical cambo and these things that bring things up majorly. But also I did it a few months ago. How long ago is that now? Probably like 4 or 5 months ago. I just went on kind of like my own personal lockdown, no gadgets. When I did this whole clearing thing, I all of a sudden was like, oh my God, I have probably like 30 journals from all of the years. And sometimes I like to go in my loft and just look through and be like, oh my God, that's so cute. Look what I was thinking then. Wow. And how far I've come. And then actually one day I was looking through and I'm on a loop. Like everything I've been saying, there's the same things for years and years and years. And I was just like, right, I am done. And I had a massive bonfire and I burned all those journals. And it was really weird because there's this kind of story that one day 50 million people's journals are going to be made into a book. They're probably not. I just burnt them and I was like, I'm done. I want to be cleansed, clear. I want to purge all of this. So yeah, I regularly go through my phone and get rid of old apps, go through, old videos from exes of God knows what, go through all the things that I can possibly think of, especially like kitchen drawers, and I'm really into feng shui. So the constipation of the house of the energy field is clutter. So all of these things, it's so good to clear the space and purge it out, whatever you don't need, and reassess and audit. It's great.
It's fire.
You're inspiring me not to be such a mess. Like if you saw what was not on camera right now in the studio, you would say like, you guys need to figure it out.
Yeah, right.
For sure.
This place needs a feminine touch.
It definitely does. So what is your right?
The energy field. When I learned that it's constipation of the energy field to have clutter. I was like, oh my God, it has to go.
We're
gonna deal.
Yeah, we're gonna X-lax it. We're gonna have to get rid of it.
We're gonna X-lax.
So I think a lot of people. You're like, although you've been a model and you're extremely beautiful and you're successful, you're very humble. And I think that a lot of people are afraid to say like, I love myself, because it comes off to people who aren't confident or humble as arrogant. What advice would you give to somebody if they really want to love themselves, but they're afraid of what their environment is going to think about that?
It's fire.
It's massive. And this is one of the biggest things in all my retreats. And when we go down beneath the layers and we get through the initial things, usually someone will be like, I'm just too afraid to say that. Like it makes me feel arrogant or sound arrogant. And it's really obvious. Well, it's obvious to me now when I've been studying this for 5 years. It's really obvious to me now why we get to that. And I definitely grew up in a house where my mum would say, oh, she loves herself, she does, as a negative thing. She's big-headed. And I do think it's to keep you safe. And like, she wouldn't want me being this, big, powerful, colorful, whatever, because then I could be attacked, or I could be this, or I could lose it all. And so it's quite obvious. But then also with what happens with empowered women in the past, women, I read this the other day, that women, when they were bleeding, were made to stuff their vaginas with horse manure. because they were too powerful. I was reading that the other day, like, oh my God. And all this genital mutilation and witches being burnt at the stake. It's only 90 years since the last witches were burnt at the stake in England. And women have been like severely banished and punished for their powers. So it's no wonder there's some hangover of that. We're only one generation away. And our mothers and grandmothers have been taught that because they've had to survive it. And this is where we need everyone on board. We need every single person to be like, okay, that was the old thing. Now we are safer to express, and we're safe to be powerful, and we're safe to be empowered. Like, it's okay, and we can have compassion for that part of us that's scared to be big, to be powerful, to be successful. Yeah.
Alan and I have talked about this a lot. Like, we both believe that there needs to be a more feminine leadership.
Oh yeah.
I think feminine leaders are the way of the future because they're way more empathetic, they're way more understanding than your average masculine.
Holistic.
Yeah, it's definitely like, yeah.
I think the 21st century will be the century for empowered women, genuinely. And feminine more specifically, because we all have masculine and feminine energies within us. And it's interesting, and I want your take on this too. I have come recently, so I just surpassed 500 coaching calls, and primarily with females. And I often say I've learned more from my female clients than they've learned from me, because when you study enough people and enough of their challenges, you see common patterns. You know that. And it's such a blessing, right? And one of the things that I've noticed with the feminine is that, and not just female, but feminine energy, I think at the root, there's a fear of not being safe. And I think the desire, I'm always looking at fears and desires. I think that's the dance. I think life is the dance between your fears and your desires. So I think the fear is not being safe, and the desire is love and self-expression. I think for the masculine, and I'm speaking from experience on this one, I think the fear is incompetence, and I think the desire is excellence and status and success. And so it's like this interesting thing where I think the masculine has unintentionally suppressed the feminine by making it feel unsafe. And I see this in relationships. I see this in the world. And look at what we've done to the globe, to Mother Nature as well. Again, I don't want to make this pessimistic because I am optimistic. I think the world's becoming more feminine in a beautiful, beautiful way as we realize what we've done to the world with our egos. What is your take on ego? What would you recommend to a male who maybe is too strong of a masculine and needs to balance it with some feminine? And again, Kevin and I are fortunate to be raised by women, so I think our feminine is naturally higher. But what's your take on all that?
Yeah, it's interesting because in my world, I've grown up with very empowered women, and I've always been in some way quite strong and quite not, I don't want to use the word dominating, but like, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it like bish, bosh, bash. It's happening. I'm good at doing things. Whatever I want to do, it's happening. It's done. It's happening. And so I find around me that I can disempower men sometimes, it can be the other way. So it's quite interesting to hear and just think about, and especially like in my own relationship, I can see where I can sometimes say something that could be a bit disempowering, and then I have to kind of like think about empowering him in our dynamic, and he's empowering himself. So yeah, it's super interesting. It's an interesting study for sure. Yeah. So as for this whole dynamic on the world, I think for men to be aware of it is the first step, of course, like just even caring enough to be aware. And I'm guessing most of the people that are listening to this are going to be aware and care, aware and care. There we go. Yeah. And then
that's certainly the goal.
It's just asking the questions and getting curious and being loving and being open and just listening to women and listening to women's struggles, and even being curious about why women get disempowered and why men have needed over these years to, I believe it's a lot to do with sexual energy. You know, men haven't really known how to feel powerful, so they've disempowered women by cutting off the genitals or, well, you know, that's obviously a very crazy out there thing, but it's happening a lot. And all these things that have happened to women have suppress. And now it's that time to be like, okay, we apologize collectively.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things in personal development that I've ever received, was a man bowing at my knees and saying, you know, I apologize for all the men who've lied to you, who've hurt you, who've this, that, like that. The first time I did anything like that was so potent and so powerful. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize I needed to hear that. And not just for myself, but for my mother, for all my female lineage. Yeah, so I think it's just, well, always coming back to the love frequency and always being curious and open and just be willing to be wrong. And who knows, like, none of us really fully know how this is all gonna pan out, but we're all hoping, or well, we probably are all hoping, that everyone gets to have this balance and women get more into politics and
Right.
women leadership. And I would love to see some heart-centered, empowered women running some of these big things. I think it would be a game changer, but it's not happening because men are scared that women are going to kind of take over. So yeah, it's a big one.
It is. It's a strange, I think it's ego at the end of the day, because, and we've talked about this, so obviously there's a lot of things going on with racism in America. And I think one of the reasons why so many people are afraid, especially privileged white men, is because they're afraid that people are going to take back power and inflict the pain that has been inflicted upon them. Like if we give away power, everybody else is going to use the power against us like we did them. So I think it's ego, and I think it's fear, and I think it's admitting, like, look, that was I wronged you, right? It's such an interesting thing. I have a question, believe it or not. So something we talk about quite often is significance. How do you find your significance is a question we ask people all the time. Back in the day when you were modeling full time, I would guess that maybe you got a lot of your significance from traveling the world and being on sets and being, sought after. Where did you used to get your significance, and how do you get your significance now today? How has that changed?
Ooh, well, it makes my toes curl a little bit to say, but I'm guessing somebody probably would want to hear this. But a lot of my significance came from men. I was constantly looking for validation from men. I would wear things that I thought men were going to like me in, so that they would validate my beauty or my body or whatever it was, because I didn't know how to validate myself. I didn't even know that was a thing that people could do. It wasn't something we were ever taught. So yeah, a lot of validation, a lot of my significance was sought after from men, for sure. And then modeling was a wonderful thing from the universe to really, really, really magnify it all. Like, everything was completely blown up as soon as I went into that and more into the limelight. Every little thing got magnified. So where I wasn't getting validation, I used to post things on Instagram when Instagram first started, and then I would wait to see if I was loved back, which I know is like a massive problem now, and Instagram are even possibly getting rid of the like feature. But I used to be that person that would post something to see if it was liked, and that's how I got my crappy little scraps of love before I knew I had it all within me. So yeah, definitely with modeling, trying to be, the other thing was that I used to have this thing that, the busy thing, like, oh my God, I'm so busy, because busy made me seem like important, wanted and powerful. And also because it was wrapped up with beauty, if I wasn't busy with modeling, that meant I wasn't beautiful enough, or, you know, all these kind of things. So there was a lot of that going on. And then now, where do I get my significance now? Yeah, I mean, I think I just get it from being a human now. Like every day I feel powerful even if I do nothing. I feel like I'm in the right place. I feel connected. I feel joyful with nothing, even in the worst situations, you know, when the shit's hitting the fan with the pandemic and all of that. I just felt this like really deep joy and safety and trust. And yeah, my human self was a little bit like, what's going on here? But my soul, like the deeper voice, just knows, is so strong. And I think that is really, I think you asked me this before, I might have skipped it, about what is self-love.
Right.
And that deepest voice, like the soul voice, the voice that knows, it's anything that reconnects you with that and builds that relationship. And there's always going to be that mean girl or mean boy voice as well that's trying to belittle you and berate you and all these things. But there's always that deeper voice. And some of my clients, when they come to me, they don't know that voice exists. So it takes a bit to get there. So yeah, anything that strengthens that relationship is self-love, in my opinion. Yeah.
I would love to. So I felt very compelled to ask you this. And I think it's really important because I remember as a really young, so I gave a speech recently to high school students. They were freshmen in high school. And naturally, I went back to when I was a freshman in high school to try to connect. And it brought up all this stuff for me, right? One of them was that I was 5'4". I didn't hit puberty at all. I was like this little boy when everyone else was becoming a man, and I felt very insignificant because I was like really smart, but like that wasn't what was valued. It was all the athletes and like, you know, people. Some of my friends were really jacked and stuff like that, and I just hadn't hit puberty, so I was this small little insignificant, insecure boy, right? And it messed with me a lot. And it's interesting because by junior year, I went from 5'4", 130 pounds to 6'2", and starting to get some of that validation back. But unfortunately, I really did ride that validation for quite some time of being smart, going to the best school, being an athlete, having a javelin record, whatever. And I wanted to ask you this because it's such a trip for me I used to watch movies when I was a little kid, and I used to see men who look like I do now. Genuinely, who were playing high school boys in the movies, and really they were 31-year-old men playing a 17-year-old who looked like me now. And it's just one of those weird Jim Carrey things where it's like, I want everyone to become rich and famous to realize that that's not where you're going to find your sense of completion. For someone who's as beautiful as you on the outside, what would you tell someone who maybe honestly isn't as beautiful as you to get them to realize that it doesn't matter like you think it does? Because back then, I would have killed to look like I do now. But what I would tell the little boy is, listen, it's not what you think it is. What would you say?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. Yeah. What would I say to somebody who maybe wasn't looking a certain way is it's nothing about the external at all. Like, it's never about the food, it's never about the weight, it's never about your intelligence, it's never about any of that. And often people message me on Instagram and say, oh yeah, if I looked like you, then I'd have self-love too. Good one.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And I always say, well, I looked pretty much the same as this 10 years ago, and I definitely did not feel like this. It's an inside job, that whole cliche thing.
Right.
Yeah. And then also with the weight, for example, I used to think once I've lost this weight, then I'll be happy. And then I did lose all the weight, and I still wasn't, it wasn't that. I realized, oh yeah, it wasn't that. So now I can be any weight and be happy. Yeah. So I think it's just coming back to that. It's always an inside job. And there's so many women. Have you ever met a woman who, is not traditionally good looking, is not well dressed, is kind of all over the place, but just owns it and gives no fucks and just like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I used to see those women and I used to judge them. I used to think, well, that's nice, but you don't look good, or you this or you that.
Right.
And now when I look back, that was kind of how I was taught by other women, because they didn't want to love themselves as they are, because they don't feel love and connected there. So if they get worse, if they stay the same or get worse, they think they're going to get less love. But actually it's that letting go when you realize it was there all along.
Profound.
It's so profound. We keep talking about letting go and purging. So we are mentored by David Meltzer. I don't know if you know Dave, but he talks about creating a void, right? You have to create a void in order for the things that you want to come into your life. When you create a void, what do? Do you focus on what you want? That's first question. I'm going to ask a 12-part question so I can catch up with Alan. No, it's just going to be 2. So that, and can you talk about the feeling of creating a void? Because sometimes it can be painful. Sometimes it can be scary. You're letting go of what you know, your past. How do you know it's going to pay off or work out? How do you know you're going in the right direction?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind as we talk about this is that I used to always date multiple men at once. So they wouldn't know about each other, and it wouldn't be serious with any of them. I wouldn't even let them in my house, but I would date lots of people because I was getting I needed a lot of validation. And then then it wouldn't work out, and then I'd meet someone else. I had this like constant meeting of different men, and I used to say I had the bench, like in sport, they're on the bench and they get called in every now and again. And then I suddenly realized, like, it's not all these men. I used to think, why, when they come to me, they're this like hunky alpha man, and then within a few weeks they're like this wet little letter. Like, what's wrong with them? There's something going wrong. And I used to think it was about them. And then I realized, oh yeah, I'm the common denominator. It's me. Okay, shit, I need to change something. So I remember having like this ritual. This is years ago. I was in New York in my apartment, and I remember being like, I need to burn this bench. This bench is the problem. So I remember doing it and thinking, oh my God. And I remember I text each man and just said, look, this is off. Like, it wasn't a very compassionate message, to be honest, but it was just like, look, this is not a thing anymore. You're not going to hear from me for a while. So, don't even bother. So I remember doing that and then feeling this void and being like, oh my God, what have I done? Because I'm not going to get this constant feed of validation now. I remember thinking, oh God, and that's scary. And it's the vacuum, it's the void, like you say. But I remember I'd already got into vision boarding, and I'd already got into, I'd read that book, Ask and It Is Given, by Esther Hicks, which is one of my pivotal books in my life. And that book, the title, Ask and It Is Given. So whatever you want, you ask for it and it is given. So I'd started to practice that already. And anytime I'm personally in a void, I come back to that. It's simple. Like, what do I want? What's my vision? And I love vision boarding because I'm really visual. And yeah, I just trust that it's coming and it's going to be there. So it's a bit of a leap of faith every time you go to the void, and focusing on what you do want. Well, for me, focusing on what I really do want and the feeling behind it. It's simple. Like, you don't actually need anything outside of you when you're focusing on the feeling, and you can connect to that feeling. So that's what I do.
Such a trip, because that's what we're looking for anyway. It's like, well, when I get that car, I'll feel good. Right? It's like, why not just feel good now? You burn a lot of stuff. Yeah. Journals and benches and... No, I'm just kidding. Oh, yeah. No, it's hilarious.
I've got literally candles burning all around me right now.
Just for the listeners, that's why we had to cancel last time. Her place was... No, I'm kidding. So one of the things that's jumping off the page here, you keep going back to your relationship with yourself. That's what this is about, self-love. When you say this deep knowing and you say, ask and it shall be given, that's a spiritual faith that it's hard for people. You keep mentioning like your human self is like scared, but your spiritual self like knows. There have been times in my life where I have that 100%, and it's never 0% and it's never 100%, but it's like closest to like most aligned. For someone who's not aligned with that highest self, what are some indicators of that? I think one of them is complaining, and I think one of them is lack of fulfillment. But I want your answer. What are your indicators that you're not aligned with that highest version and you're letting the human fear self take over?
I think anytime you're not getting the results you want. So actually, when we were supposed to have this podcast a few weeks ago, I was in Ibiza. I'd been in Ibiza for a few weeks, a few months even. And I was really aligned to go. I was getting all the messages and all the signs to go to Ibiza. And I got there and it was great. Instantly manifested this great villa. We had 8 things that we really wanted in a villa. And this villa came to me through manifestation, and it had 7 of the 8. The day we moved in, the one that was missing was that it didn't have a pool. And then the day we moved in, the guy was like, oh yeah, I've just installed a pool last week. So we actually got it all. So this is like, when I'm in alignment, things like this are happening all the time. Like it's like magic. And I'm just like, thank you, more please, every single time. And then when I'm out of alignment, which I got in Ibiza, so I didn't want to come back to England because it's dark at 4 o'clock, wet, rainy, autumn, like avoid. I really didn't want to come back, but I hadn't realized how I was putting myself out of alignment because I needed to be back here. So what I started to realize was things weren't just flowing. Like, you know, even simple things like we went to get this other villa and we went to look around it and it had this like horrible table in, and the woman said she could take it out, and then 2 minutes later she's like, no, we can't take it out, and we'd already paid the money. And then she changed the goalposts, and the conversation was just not nice. And I was just like, ooh, and just noticing where things aren't in flow. And also when I check in with my guidance, or when I check in with this deeper voice, and I'm like, is this right? And I'm not getting like, oh yeah, this is right. It's like, could be, we'll see. You know, so for me, that's like out of alignment when the results are not aligning with what I thought it was going to be or what I want it to be. And also just the quality of my thoughts. At that point, when we're in Ibiza, I felt this like sense of boredom inside me, which is not a familiar thing for me. I'm never a bored person. I can't even remember feeling bored. But every day I was checking in with myself, and I was like, I'm like, meh. I'm like bored. And things in my business, you know, just something that was meant to come in just sort of went out the window, and then something else. And I was like, ooh, I'm out of alignment. That's what's happening here. So that day when I had that realization, I was like, right, for me to come back into alignment, what do I need? So I was sat on the beach with my friend. We're both sat in opposite directions on the beach.
Burning something. No, I'm kidding. Are you burning something? I'm kidding.
We both sat there like, we didn't speak to each other at all. I was like, I feel I'm out of alignment. She was like, let's go to the beach. So we're both sat there like this. And I'm just listening. That was it. I was just listening. I was just asking myself, what do I want to do? What would be fun? What would be joyful? What do I desire? I'm asking myself these high vibe questions. And what's coming in was go back to England. And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound fun. But that was what was coming in. And that night, we came back to England. We literally jumped on a ferry, came back to England. And as soon as I got back to England, everything came back into flow. Like literally signing up clients, people are buying my courses left, right, and center, everything, opportunities, speaking gigs. It's like, and it was all waiting. So I feel that all the clients, all the opportunities, all the amazing things, all the money for anyone watching is all already there. It's almost like there's a big glass around us sometimes. And if we're out of alignment, it's waiting for us. And as soon as we get back into alignment, it just all comes in.
Wow, super powerful.
This is one of my favorites. So we only have a couple of minutes. I want to make sure that you have time to talk about your programs, about your retreats, about everything that you have going on. Talk away.
Okay, so lots of things. My big thing is the 12-step self-love transformation, which is my favorite thing to teach. It's a step-by-step process to self-love. So it goes into every corner of everything that I've ever taught over 5 years with every resource, and it's got an amazing community. So that's the big one, 12-step self-love transformation. And then usually I have retreats in Bali, Ibiza, Portugal, England, and Mexico. But this year there's been a little blip in that.
Right.
So there's going to be a virtual one in between Christmas and New Year for one day that is called the Self-Love Soiree. So that one's coming up. And then my book is about to be published, which is called P.S. I Love Me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's coming out. And yeah, I'm just trying to think. There's so many things, but that's the most of it.
I don't know if you saw my story today, but I've been seeing 11:11 almost every day. I have a question. Yeah. When I see 11:10, does that mean, and I don't know, right? But does that mean I'm not in full alignment? Because I've been seeing 11:10 a lot too.
I think that's the universe having a sense of humor.
Well, I like that.
It means your ego's flaring. No, I'm kidding. Gina, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much. We're going to have you on one of our live masterminds sometime to teach those 12 steps or whatever, and then you can plug your course at the tail end. But this has been super tremendous, very synchronistic. I'm glad it ended up happening. And I may or may not burn some of my journals.
Ooh.
Because of you. So I just want you to know that.
If you could only leave the listeners with one thing to help them get to the next level of their life, what would it be, Gina?
With self-love, literally anything is possible. So when you're connected in with yourself, your higher self, your most passionate self, your most loving self, anything is possible. Like the moment people snap into that, miracles happen. So just remember that with self-love, anything is possible.
It's absolute fire.
Powerful.
Awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the one and only Gina Swire. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you on the next one.
Talk to you soon.